Okay, here we go. Here's a tune called I Do It For You.
Across the Great Divide, a photo chronicle of the counterculture was published in late 2010. The title has to do with crossing some divide and the ride we took. It also has to do with the cultural divide that existed at that time. Between 1969 and 1977, I took about 3,000 images of the communes in the Southwest. Originally, I was a graduate student at SUNY Buffalo. I got a faculty fund grant to travel around the Southwest in the summer of '69 and photograph communes. As soon as I got the grant, I bought a camera and we headed west, my partner David Perkins and I, who later became my first husband. We had a sort of personal motivation. We'd heard a lot was happening in the Southwest, but we didn't know exactly what it was, and we wanted to see for ourselves. It was a time of questioning, experimentation, great social division and political unrest, and we thought maybe there was something out there that would answer some of the questions we had. I did have the feeling I was recording something for later time. Time magazine in the early '70s said there were 2,000 major communes. The Associated Press a year later said there were 3,000 major communes across the country and 3 million people participating in the communal movement. So it was a large movement, and you did have a feeling it had a great deal of momentum and that it might be going somewhere. And it was definitely such a drastic step and change in direction from what most of us had been raised to expect we would do in our life that I felt it should be recorded. Our first trip in the summer of 1969, we were traveling around and heard about a solstice celebration. Ken Kesey and Further were there, and Wavy Gravy, Stuart Brand was there. So we rolled up in our camper and stayed there, and I took some pictures. This picture is a picture of Ken Kesey striding around in some underwear. It was bright red with white polka dots, and he proudly told everyone the Beatles had given him this underwear. One of the highlights of the solstice celebration, as it were, was a bus race in which 3 or 4 huge school buses that were gaily painted, including Further, the historical Further, which by now everyone felt was an artifact and wanted to be photographed with. At any rate, there was a bus race across the meadow where Further didn't win, possibly because so many people wanted to ride on Further that the weight made it impossible to be the winner of the bus race, the famous bus race. On our second trip, we went back to a place called Libre in southern Colorado that had appealed to us, and we sort of then decided that maybe it was something we wanted to do. So the photographs in the book are divided into those first exploratory trips, and then in the second part of the book are photographs of Libre and the Huerfano Valley, where there were many communal experiments. It was sort of a little nation state of communal activity at the time. We were interested in organic food. We were interested in environmentalism. It was definitely an anti-consumer movement. We built our houses from recycled materials or materials that people considered worthless. And we were interested in a more tolerant and less belligerent political stance in the country. So there are a lot of things that these young 20-year-olds were running around talking about that still have weight today. When we got to Libre, most of the houses were on the lower land, and the people in the lower land said there's nowhere else to build but on the ridge. The lower houses had electricity. They were much more accessible, but if you want to be here, you're going to be on the ridge. The ridge had a wonderful view. David and I were academics. Possibly he took shop in high school, but I think we'd only built possibly a brick and board bookcase before. But nevertheless, we decided we were going to build an 8-sided house around a huge rock in the first meadow up the ridge. We decided we were going to use logs that were left on the mountains by loggers and rejected because they were too small, or they had a bend in it, or they didn't like them for one reason. So they were just standing on the ground, and we just went up in flatbeds and got them. The walls were made from reject railroad ties, which we got at the local lumber mill for $5 a truckload. We used metal pieces on the top of the rock to set the vigas, or logs, supporting logs, from the ventilator shafts of the Rockefeller coal mines, which were abandoned at the time. I was working on the ridge at Libre at 9,000 feet trying to build a house, so I didn't have much opportunity to go around and photograph people. I was just working. We had no electricity, no running water. Wood was the only source of heat. We were working pretty much any day that you could work. In the summer of 1977, I took a poetry course at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics in Boulder, and got to know many of the poets in Boulder at that time. And Allen Ginsberg, Peter Orlovsky, and Gregory Corso came down to Libre to give a poetry reading to ostensibly raise money for a clinic we were building in the Huerfano. Allen stayed for a couple of weeks. He did a retreat in a cabin Dean had built on the back of Libre's land by the waterfall. Peter just stayed around for the lark of it. But at any rate, they spent a lot of time there, and it was wonderful because it was the people who had inspired us in many ways, the beatniks, the Jack Kerouac comrades, who had sort of, in our imagination, made us think of the road west and living a different kind of life from the conventional life. These pictures were taken 40 years ago, some of them. The adobes that I photographed have washed back into the mud. Some of the domes have collapsed or burned down. The people who were young and vibrant are late middle age at least, and some of them are dead. The children are approaching middle age themselves. So I thought that title encapsulated that trip across time. I wrote a memoir of my life in the southwestern communes called Huerfano, A Memoir of Life in the Counterculture, and that was published in late 2004. Both books complement each other and are a set of reportage about that time.